All right, today we are doing something a little bit different. We're not just looking at isolated, spooky campfire stories. Instead, we're diving into decades of meticulously gathered source material, everything from hard military radar data to whistleblower testimonies. And we're going to view it all as a single, connected, systemic anomaly. By the end of this explainer, you're going to see a cohesive picture of a phenomenon that absolutely challenges the very fabric of our reality.
Now, just to clarify our baseline right out of the gate, the shift in terminology from UFO to UAP, unidentified anomalous phenomenon, happened for a really profound reason. See, flying implies wings, right? Aerodynamics. But the objects described in our sources exhibit what we call transmedium capabilities. They operate seamlessly from the vacuum of deep space, straight down into our atmosphere and right into the ocean. And they do it without wings, control surfaces, or any conventional signs of lift whatsoever.
Think of this as our investigative funnel. We're going to start broad with modern military UAP encounters, look into historic crash retrieval programs, drill right down into the Varginha, Brazil incident, examine reverse engineering alien technology, and finally, close out with close contact and abduction. So let's kick things off with Section 1, Modern Military UAP Encounters, and specifically the APG-79 radar upgrades. We're opening the files on modern military data here, and what's absolutely fascinating is that a routine hardware upgrade in the US Navy basically pulled the curtain back on our own skies. Around 2014, jets got upgraded from the old APG-73 radar to the APG-79. Pilots described this as literally going from a fuddy analog TV to a crisp digital OLED display. And suddenly, boom, a radar system capable of highly advanced multi-target tracking starts capturing daily UAP activity that had just been flying around completely undetected before. And you know, these weren't just weird little blips on a screen. One of the most striking visual descriptions we have comes from a Navy pilot who had a near midair collision. He flew right past an object just sitting there, perfectly stationed at the entry point of their military working airspace. The pilot vividly described it as a dark gray cube completely encased inside a clear, translucent sphere. I mean, imagine seeing that blow past your canopy. So the absolute crucial point here isn't just what these things look like, it's how they move. These kinematic anomalies completely break our standard models of aviation physics. I'm talking about objects maintaining perfectly stationary positions against 140-mile-per-hour hurricane-force winds up at altitude, right? Then they'd fly in these highly efficient racetrack patterns for 13 hours straight, with zero visible exhaust, no wings, no conventional Newtonian thrust whatsoever, before just gone. Instantaneous hypersonic acceleration. Which brings us to Section 2, Historic Crash Retrieval Programs, tracing the origins of recovery. Okay, if these transmedium crafts are just operating with impunity in our skies, the obvious question is, well, what happens when one actually comes down? The geopolitical timeline here is wild. According to intelligence community whistleblowers, one of the earliest documented recoveries happened way back in 1933 in Magenta, Italy. A bell-shaped craft crashed. Mussolini's government brought in German scientists to look at it, but through back channels, Pope Pius XII actually informed FDR, American President Franklin D. Roosevelt. By the end of World War II, the OSS, which was basically the pre-CIA, swooped in and recovered the artifact. Now, I really want you to let this number sink in for a second. When talking about crash retrieval operations across the decades, insiders assert that the United States is holding on to a double-digit number of different exotic crafts. We are not just talking about one isolated event in Italy or, Roswell. We're looking at an ongoing, highly compartmentalized reality. Let's move on to Section 3, the Varginha, Brazil incident, focusing on the 1996 ground recovery. To really understand what a recovery looks like boots on the ground, we need to go further down our investigative funnel to a super visceral case from Brazil. And this one allegedly involved biological entities, not just hardware. Witnesses and medical professionals all reported the exact same bizarre, honestly horrifying physical detail. They described this overwhelming, putrid scent that was quite literally paralyzing. It was so intense that whole hospital wings had to be shut down and sanitized, and witnesses said the smell lingered in their noses for days. Just imagine taking a skunk and multiplying it by 100,000. The timeline of this whole incident is incredibly rapid. Step 1. 3 local young women run into this weak, crouching, non-human entity right by a cinder block wall, literally locking eyes with it. Step 2. Brazilian military police officers arrive fast and basically capture the entity with their bare hands. Step 3. It's rushed to a regional hospital where doctors are ordered, under heavy armed guard mind you, to take x-rays straight through a sealed body bag. And finally, Step 4. An unauthorized U.S. Air Force plane allegedly lands at a nearby base to retrieve and transport the payload out of there. And, it's impossible to ignore the severe human toll here. The civilians and the military drivers swept up in the Varginha incident faced some intense military intimidation. I mean, mothers were allegedly offered literal briefcases of cash to say their own kids were lying. The psychological burden of harboring a secret like that for decades, it's left a profound and really lasting mark on that entire local community.
All right, Section 4, Reverse Engineering Alien Technology. Unlocking the source code.
So this brings us to a really fascinating threshold. Once these anomalous materials and crafts are recovered, how on earth do we even begin to understand them? Enter Bob Lazar. Back in the late 80s, this propulsion scientist claimed he was brought into a highly compartmentalized program at a facility called Area S4, just south of Area 51. The workspace he described is basically where theoretical physics meets completely unexplainable hardware. He claimed the government had access to 9 distinct, totally uniquely shaped crafts. His specific job? Analyzing a hemisphere-shaped reactor that operated completely independent of any electrical wiring. It relied entirely on proximity to generate its own self-contained gravitational field. How crazy is that? Just consider this really vivid physical sensation Lazar described when the reactor was actually activated. He said he couldn't physically touch the sphere. The localized gravity literally pushed his hands away, exactly like that resistance you feel when you try to force 2 matching magnet poles together. We've all felt that, right? But this was a gravity field. To grasp how this actually works, we basically have to throw out the textbook. Our current Newtonian physics, it relies on chemical fire, mass, and equal and opposite reactions. You throw mass out the back to push a rocket forward. But the theoretical framework for these UAPs, which has been discussed by top physicists in the source material, relies on space-time warping. Instead of thrust, the craft generates an insulated gravity bubble. It effectively just removes itself from Earth's gravity, bypassing standard aerodynamics entirely. Let's break down how this builds into a functional system. Think of this like a diagnostic readout for a transmedium craft. Step 1. The reactor emits a specific energetic frequency that interacts with the craft's metamaterial skin. Step 2, this generates that insular bubble we talked about, essentially a localized pocket of space-time totally cut off from Earth's gravitational pull. Step 3, by compressing the linear space-time directly ahead of the craft, it can effectively hopscotch vast distances. And boom, this space-time compression perfectly explains the instantaneous, hypersonic acceleration and that weird stationary hovering Navy radar operators were seeing. Which brings us to our final section, Section 5, Close Contact and Abduction, when humans intersect the phenomenon. Okay, so we've looked at the radar data, the crash timelines, and the theoretical physics happening in the labs. But what happens when a fragile human body gets a little too close to an active craft out in the wild? Well, in 1975, a logger named Travis Walton approached a golden, glowing disk hovering in the woods in Arizona, and the physical impact was just terrifying. He didn't describe being hit by an intentional weapon, but rather, as he closed the distance, an intense energy discharge leaped from the object and grounded itself directly through his body, violently throwing him backward. And this forces us to ask a deeply critical question here. Are these encounters intentional attacks, or are they simply the incredibly dangerous byproducts of a human intersecting a massive, localized space-time propulsion field? It's definitely worth noting that the exact area where Walton was struck is geographically famous for extreme naturally occurring lightning strikes. So, through the lens of advanced physics, a so-called attack might actually just be a tragic accidental case of static discharge from a gravity drive. When we step back and look at the whole board, the source material does something pretty remarkable. By connecting that APG-79 military radar data, the hidden geopolitical history of crash retrievals, the physical sensory evidence from Varginha, the theoretical physics of space-time compression, and the visceral reality of civilian contact, we actually get a cohesive picture. It is baffling for sure, but it's no longer just a scattered collection of myths. It is a highly structured, observable phenomenon. So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought.
If we accept the evidence laid out in this explainer, that transmedium, gravity warping technology is not only real, but actively present in our skies and potentially sitting in classified labs right now, then the entire ceiling of human potential has just been shattered. What happens to our society, our energy grid, and our place in the universe the very day this technology becomes common knowledge? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep your eyes on the skies and never stop questioning the world around you.